Riley Chen walked into Northgate Women's Prison, looking like she'd never been in a fight in her life. 5'2", 110 pounds. Baby-faced, with her hair in two braids like a teenager. She was 24 years old, but could have passed for 16. When the intake officer asked if she had any martial arts training, Riley shook her head and smiled nervously. "No, ma'am. I'm just a graphic designer." The intake officer didn't know Riley was lying. Nobody did. By day 2, the hierarchy made itself clear. The Iron Sisters controlled B Block, 8 women who'd turned the prison into their personal kingdom. Their leader was a 6-foot former MMA fighter named Tasha the Hammer Brooks, serving 20 years for aggravated assault. Tasha spotted Riley in the cafeteria during lunch. Small, scared-looking, perfect target. "Hey, China doll," Tasha called out, her crew flanking her on both sides. "You're sitting in my spot." Riley looked up from her tray, confused. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Too late for sorry. Tasha grabbed Riley's tray and dumped it on the floor. "Now pick it up, with your tongue." The cafeteria went silent. 60 inmates watching. Guards frozen, waiting to see what would happen. Riley stood up slowly. She was so small that standing, she barely reached Tasha's shoulders. "Please don't do this," Riley said quietly. Tasha laughed and shoved her. Hard. Riley didn't fall. She shifted her weight, absorbed the impact, and her eyes changed. "Stay with me until the end, because what Riley does in the next 10 seconds will put Tasha in the hospital, expose a background in underground cage fighting that earned her the nickname The Ghost, and turn an entire prison upside down." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The concrete walls of Northgate Women's Correctional Facility had witnessed their share of violence over the years, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold in that cafeteria. Most new inmates arrived either terrified or trying too hard to appear tough. Riley Chen walked through those steel doors with something far more dangerous than either fear or false bravado. She carried herself with complete invisibility. Her crime was supposedly embezzlement, white collar, clean, the kind of charge that usually meant an easy ride through minimum security. But budget cuts and overcrowding had landed her in a medium security facility where the rules were written in blood and enforced with fists. The paperwork said she'd stolen $40,000 from her employer's accounts. What it didn't say was why someone with her particular skill set had chosen such a sloppy, traceable crime. Riley's cellmate was a woman named Carmen, who'd been inside for 3 years on drug charges. Carmen had survived by keeping her head down and her mouth shut, but she felt protective of the small Asian woman who seemed so out of place among the hardened criminals of B Block. "Listen, Chica," Carmen whispered on Riley's first night as they lay in their narrow bunks. "You need to understand how things work in here. The Iron Sisters run everything. They decide who eats, who gets protection, who gets hurt. Tasha Brooks is their queen, and she doesn't like anyone who stands out." Riley stared at the ceiling where shadows from the corridor lights created geometric patterns on the concrete. What makes someone stand out? Being too pretty? Being too smart? Being different? You're all 3, so you're in trouble. Carmen turned on her side to face Riley's bunk. "My advice? Find someone bigger to protect you, or learn to make yourself useful to the sisters. Otherwise, you're going to have a very bad time." What Carmen didn't know was that Riley had spent the last 6 years making herself useful to people who operated in shadows, underground fighting circuits that existed beneath the notice of athletic commissions, warehouse matches where bets reached 6 figures and fighters disappeared when they lost too often, places where a small woman who could move like smoke and strike like lightning was worth her weight in gold. The nickname, The Ghost, hadn't come from her size. It came from the way she seemed to vanish and reappear during fights, slipping through defenses that should have been impenetrable. Opponents would throw punches at empty air while Riley materialized behind them with strikes that ended fights before the crowd could blink. But that life was supposed to be over. The embezzlement charge was her way out. her ticket to a few years of quiet time before starting fresh somewhere new. She'd planned to serve her sentence invisibly, just another white-collar criminal doing soft time. The last thing she wanted was to attract attention or remind anyone of who she used to be. The Iron Sisters had different plans. Tasha Brooks had built her reputation on violence and maintained it through constant demonstration of power. At 6 feet tall, with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, she was an intimidating presence even by prison standards. Her MMA background was legitimate: 12 professional fights, 8 wins, 4 by knockout. The assault charge that landed her in Northgate involved putting 3 men in the hospital during a bar fight that started when someone made the mistake of grabbing her inappropriately. Inside these walls, Tasha had found her true calling. The Iron Sisters weren't just a gang, they were a business. They controlled the flow of contraband, decided which inmates received protection, and made sure that anyone who challenged their authority learned painful lessons about respect. New inmates were evaluated quickly and sorted into categories: useful, harmless, or threats that needed to be eliminated. Riley Chen appeared to fall squarely into the harmless category. Small, quiet, educated. The kind of inmate who would keep her head down and serve her time without causing problems. But Tasha had learned to trust her instincts, and something about the new girl didn't sit right. The way she moved through the corridors, the way her eyes tracked movement without appearing to watch anything, the way she held herself despite her small stature. "There's something off about the new fish," Tasha told her lieutenant, a scarred woman named Viper who'd earned her nickname by fighting with improvised weapons. "She's too calm for someone who should be terrified." Viper glanced across the common area where Riley sat reading a paperback novel, her legs tucked under her like a college student in a library. "She looks harmless enough. Probably some rich girl who got caught stealing from Daddy's company." "Rich girls cry more," Tasha replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen every type of inmate pass through these walls. "They break faster. This one hasn't shed a single tear since she got here." The decision to test Riley came during her second day. The cafeteria was Tasha's favorite stage for demonstrations of power. 60 witnesses, limited escape routes, and guards who had learned that intervening too quickly often made situations worse. It was the perfect place to establish dominance over a new inmate. Riley entered the cafeteria that morning, carrying herself with the same quiet dignity she'd maintained since arrival. She collected her tray of watery eggs and stale toast without complaint, accepting whatever nutrition the underfunded facility provided. Her eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, cataloging exits, guard positions, and the subtle territorial boundaries that divided different groups of inmates. The Iron Sisters held court at 3 tables in the center of the room, their positioning strategic and deliberate. Tasha sat with her back to the wall, her crew arranged around her like spokes on a wheel. They could see everything, control access to the food line, and project their presence throughout the space. Riley found an empty table near the windows and sat down to eat in peace. She had no interest in territory or politics. She just wanted to serve her time quietly and disappear back into whatever life awaited her on the outside. But in a place like Northgate, wanting to be left alone was often interpreted as weakness, and weakness invited predators. Tasha's laughter died in her throat as she saw the transformation in Riley's eyes. What had been soft and apologetic moments before was now cold and calculating. The small woman didn't look scared anymore. She looked like she was measuring distances and angles with mathematical precision. "Last chance to walk away," Riley said, her voice barely above a whisper. The cafeteria had gone so quiet that her words carried to every corner of the room. Tasha's face flushed red with embarrassment and rage. No one talked to her like that. Not in her house, not in front of her crew. She drew back her fist, putting her full weight behind a punch that had ended fights in professional rings across 3 states. What happened next defied everything the witnesses thought they knew about physics. Riley moved like water flowing around a stone. Tasha's fist cut through empty air where Riley's head had been a fraction of a second before. The small woman had somehow slipped to the side and forward simultaneously, closing the distance between them until she was inside Tasha's guard, her body positioned perfectly for a counterattack. The first strike came so fast that most inmates missed it entirely. Riley's palm connected with a nerve cluster just below Tasha's ribs, a technique she'd learned from a Korean master who'd taught her that the human body was a collection of pressure points waiting to be exploited. The blow looked gentle, almost like a pat on the back. Tasha's eyes went wide as her diaphragm spasmed and her breathing stopped. She tried to step back, to create distance, but her legs weren't responding properly. Riley had struck a second pressure point near her hip, disrupting the nerve signals that controlled her movement. The Iron Sisters' leader, the woman who had dominated this prison through pure physical intimidation, found herself paralyzed and gasping for air while a woman half her size stood calmly in front of her. But Riley wasn't finished. Her training in underground fighting circuits had taught her that mercy was often mistaken for weakness, and weakness in places like this could be fatal. If she was going to reveal herself, she needed to make a statement that would prevent future challenges. Riley's next strike targeted the brachial plexus, a cluster of nerves in Tasha's shoulder that controlled arm function. Her knuckles found the exact spot with surgical precision, and Tasha's right arm went completely numb. The paralysis spread through her dominant limb like electricity, leaving her unable to defend herself or fight back. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. Tasha crashed to her knees, her massive frame shaking as she struggled to draw breath. The woman who had terrorized B Block for 3 years was now helpless in front of the entire cafeteria, brought down by someone who looked like she should be studying for college finals rather than disabling trained fighters with her bare hands. Viper was the first to react. The scarred lieutenant of the Iron Sisters pulled a sharpened toothbrush from her sleeve and lunged forward, aiming for Riley's neck with a strike designed to open arteries and end the fight permanently. Riley had been expecting this. In underground fighting, there were no rules about fair play or one-on-one combat. Multiple attackers were common, weapons were standard, and the only rule was survival. She ducked under Viper's thrust and grabbed the woman's wrist, applying pressure to nerve points that forced her fingers to release the improvised weapon. The toothbrush clattered across the concrete floor as Viper found herself spun around and locked in a chokehold that cut off blood flow to her brain. Viper clawed desperately at Riley's arm, trying to break free, but the small woman's technique was flawless. Within seconds, Viper's struggles grew weaker as unconsciousness approached. Riley held the chokehold for exactly 3 seconds longer than necessary to ensure Viper would stay down, then released her grip and let the woman collapse next to her leader. 2 more Iron Sisters rushed forward simultaneously, thinking they could overwhelm Riley through sheer numbers. One swung a sock filled with soap bars toward Riley's skull, while the other attempted to tackle her around the waist. Riley had faced worse odds in warehouse fights, where losing meant more than just getting hurt. Her body moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over as years of training kicked in automatically. She sidestepped the improvised weapon and grabbed the attacker's arm, using the woman's momentum against her to send her crashing into a nearby table. The furniture splintered under the impact, and the inmate lay groaning among scattered plastic trays and spilled food. The second attacker's tackle met empty air as Riley pivoted and dropped low, sweeping the woman's legs out from under her. The Iron Sister hit the concrete floor face first with a sickening crack that echoed through the silent cafeteria. 4 down in less than 10 seconds. The remaining Iron Sisters backed away slowly, their faces showing a mixture of terror and disbelief. They had never seen anything like this. Riley hadn't used brute force or wild swinging. Every movement had been precise, controlled, devastating. She fought like someone who understood violence as a science rather than an emotion. Riley straightened up and looked around the cafeteria. 60 inmates stared back at her in absolute silence. Guards stood frozen near the walls, their hands hovering over radios and weapons, but unable to process what they had just witnessed. Tasha was still on her knees, gasping for breath as feeling slowly returned to her limbs. Blood trickled from her nose where she'd hit the floor, and her right arm hung useless at her side. The woman who had ruled through fear now looked up at Riley with something approaching respect, mixed with genuine terror. "My name is Riley Chen," Riley said, her voice carrying clearly through the dead silence. "I came here to serve my time quietly. I don't want your territory. I don't want your business. I don't want your respect. I just want to be left alone." She looked down at Tasha, who was struggling to stand on unsteady legs. "But if anyone else decides to test me, if anyone thinks what just happened was luck or a fluke, they're welcome to find out otherwise. I've spent 6 years fighting in places where losing meant never walking out. This cafeteria doesn't scare me. None of you scare me." Riley turned and walked toward the exit, stepping carefully around the bodies of the Iron Sisters scattered across the floor. Every inmate in the room watched her leave, and many would later swear they could see why she'd been called the Ghost in the underground fighting world. She moved like someone who existed between the normal rules of physics and violence, someone who had learned to be invisible until the moment she chose to strike. And when that moment came, she was absolutely devastating. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Medical teams rushed in to treat the injured Iron Sisters while guards moved to secure the scene. But the real damage had already been done. In less than 10 seconds, Riley Chen had dismantled the most powerful gang in B Block and announced herself as something entirely different from what her paperwork suggested. Word spread through every cell block within hours. The quiet graphic designer with the baby face and braided hair wasn't who she appeared to be. She was something far more dangerous. Someone with training and experience that belonged in a different world entirely. The question now wasn't whether Riley could survive in Northgate Women's Prison. The question was whether anyone else was brave enough to test her again. News of the cafeteria incident reached Warden Patricia Morrison within the hour. She sat behind her oak desk reviewing security footage that showed something impossible. A woman who weighed barely over 100 pounds had systematically dismantled the most feared gang in her facility, using techniques that belonged in action movies, not prison cafeterias. Morrison had been running correctional facilities for 15 years. She'd seen riots, stabbings, full-scale gang wars that required riot teams to restore order, but she'd never seen anything like Riley Chen. The footage showed precision that suggested military training, martial arts expertise, or something even more specialized. "Pull her file again," Morrison told her assistant. "Everything. Background checks, arrest reports, court transcripts. Someone who moves like that doesn't end up in my prison on an embezzlement charge without there being more to the story." The assistant returned with a thin folder that contained surprisingly little information. Riley Chen, 24 years old, born in San Francisco. Parents deceased. No siblings. Graduated from art school with a degree in graphic design. Employed by Meridian Marketing for 2 years, before allegedly stealing $40,000 through electronic transfers. Clean record before the arrest. No military service. No documented martial arts training. Morrison studied the intake photos. Riley looked exactly like what her paperwork claimed. A young professional who'd made a stupid mistake and gotten caught. But people who looked like Sunday school teachers didn't usually possess the ability to neutralize trained fighters with surgical precision. "Get Detective Raymond on the phone," Morrison told her assistant, the one who worked her case. "I want to know what we're really dealing with here." While the warden sought answers, Riley found herself facing a different kind of problem. Word of her demonstration had spread beyond B Block, and not all the attention was unwelcome. Inmates who'd been victimized by the Iron Sisters approached her throughout the day, whispering thanks and offering small tokens of respect. An extra roll at dinner, a bar of decent soap, a paperback book in better condition than the prison library's offerings. But respect in places like Northgate came with expectations. Other inmates began approaching Riley with problems they wanted solved, conflicts they hoped she could resolve through the same methods she'd used on Tasha. Riley declined every request politely but firmly. "I'm not looking to replace the Iron Sisters," she told a woman named Michelle, who'd asked Riley to intimidate an inmate who'd been stealing from her. "I just want to be left alone." Michelle looked confused. "But you could run this whole place. Nobody would dare cross you after what happened today." Riley shook her head and walked away. Power was the last thing she wanted. She'd seen what happened to people who built reputations on violence. They attracted challenges from those seeking to prove themselves. They became targets for law enforcement agencies looking to make examples. They ended up dead or serving life sentences in maximum security cells. The underground fighting world had taught her that the smartest fighters were the ones who stayed invisible until they had no choice but to strike. Visibility meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant questions she couldn't afford to answer. But invisibility was no longer an option. Carmen was waiting in their cell when Riley returned from the common area that evening. Her cellmate's expression mixed admiration with genuine concern. "Girl, you need to understand what you've done," Carmen said, keeping her voice low. "The Iron Sisters weren't just bullies. They were connected. Tasha has friends in other facilities, allies on the outside. You just declared war on people who don't forgive or forget." Riley sat on her bunk and began braiding her hair for the night. The simple routine helped calm her mind, a technique she'd learned during her fighting days when pre-match nerves threatened to compromise her performance. "I didn't declare anything," Riley replied. "I defended myself. There's a difference. Not in here there isn't. You put their leader in the medical wing. You humiliated them in front of the entire block. They can't let that stand, or they lose everything they've built." Carmen was right, and Riley knew it. Prison hierarchies operated on perception and fear. The Iron Sisters couldn't maintain their position if word spread that they'd been defeated by someone who looked like a college student. They would have to respond, or watch their empire crumble as other inmates realized the supposed queens were vulnerable. The question was when and how that response would come. Riley learned the answer sooner than expected. At 3 a.m, she woke to the sound of her cell door opening. Years of light sleeping had trained her to wake instantly at any unusual sound. A survival mechanism from apartments in dangerous neighborhoods and hotel rooms in foreign cities where her fighting had taken her. 3 figures entered the cell silently. They moved with practiced stealth, their faces covered with torn pieces of bedsheet to hide their identities. One carried a sock filled with batteries. Another held a sharpened piece of metal that gleamed in the dim light from the corridor. The third had what appeared to be a garrote made from braided wire. They expected to find Riley sleeping deeply, vulnerable and unaware. Instead, they found empty air where her body should have been. Riley had rolled silently from her bunk the moment the door opened, positioning herself in the corner where shadows would hide her small frame. She watched the intruders approach her empty bed, weapons raised, ready to deliver punishment for her earlier humiliation of their gang. The first attacker realized something was wrong when her sock of batteries connected with nothing but pillow and blanket. She pulled back the covers, expecting to find Riley cowering or trying to hide. Instead, she found sheets arranged to mimic a sleeping body. Riley moved like her nickname suggested. The ghost materialized behind the first attacker, her arm snaking around the woman's throat in a chokehold that cut off both air and blood flow to the brain. The sock of batteries fell from nerveless fingers as the attacker went limp in seconds. The second intruder spun toward the sound of her companion collapsing, swinging her improvised blade in wild arcs that cut through empty air. Riley had already shifted position, flowing around the woman's guard like smoke. Her hand found pressure points along the attacker's wrist and elbow, causing the weapon to drop as nerve signals failed to reach the woman's fingers. A knee to the solar plexus doubled the intruder over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Riley's elbow descended with calculated force on the back of the woman's neck, sending her into unconsciousness beside her partner. The third attacker had more experience. She recognized that their ambush had failed, and their target was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Rather than engage directly, she backed toward the cell door, hoping to escape and warn others about what they were facing. Riley couldn't allow that. If word spread that the Iron Sisters' revenge had failed, it would only lead to escalation. More attackers. Deadlier weapons. Eventually, someone would succeed through sheer numbers or luck, and Riley would end up as another prison statistic. She moved between the intruder and the exit with fluid grace, her body blocking escape routes while maintaining perfect balance. The woman with the garrote lashed out desperately, trying to loop the wire around Riley's neck in a last attempt to complete her mission. Riley caught the wire in her hands, ignoring the sharp metal that bit into her palms as she twisted the weapon away from her throat. Blood ran down her fingers, but her grip remained steady. She pulled the intruder forward, off balance, and struck nerve clusters along the woman's collarbone that sent waves of paralysis through her upper body. The garrote fell to the concrete floor with a metallic whisper. The third attacker joined her companions in unconsciousness, leaving Riley alone with 3 bodies and the growing realization that her problems were just beginning. Carmen had slept through the entire encounter, a testament to both Riley's silent efficiency and her cellmate's ability to ignore disturbances that might get her in trouble with the wrong people. Riley checked her pulse to make sure she was genuinely asleep and not faking unconsciousness out of fear. Satisfied that Carmen was safe, Riley turned her attention to the aftermath. 3 unconscious women in her cell would raise questions she couldn't answer truthfully. She needed a story that would satisfy the guards without revealing the extent of her capabilities or the organized nature of the attack. Riley arranged the bodies to suggest they had fought each other rather than ganging up on her. She placed weapons near different attackers, creating evidence of a 3-way conflict that had nothing to do with the cell's occupants. The blood on her hands became evidence of trying to break up the fight rather than participating in it. By the time she was finished, the scene suggested that 3 Iron Sisters had entered the cell to settle scores with each other, only to knock themselves unconscious in the process. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was better than admitting she had defeated 3 armed attackers simultaneously without suffering significant injury. Riley sat on her bunk and waited for the guards to discover what had happened. Her hands stung from the wire cuts, but the wounds were superficial. More concerning was the message the attack had sent. The Iron Sisters were willing to risk everything for revenge, even if it meant violating the unwritten rules about nighttime raids on sleeping inmates. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Dawn brought chaos to B Block as guards discovered the unconscious women in Riley's cell. Medical teams rushed to treat the injured, while investigators tried to piece together what had happened. Riley's story of attempting to break up a fight between gang members was thin, but the physical evidence supported her version of events. Warden Morrison arrived at the scene within an hour, her expression grim as she surveyed the aftermath. 3 more Iron Sisters in the medical wing meant the gang was effectively neutralized, at least temporarily. But it also meant her facility was spinning toward chaos, as other inmates realized the old power structure was collapsing. "Miss Chen," Morrison said, approaching Riley, who sat quietly on her bunk while crime scene photographers documented the cell. "You seem to find yourself in the middle of a lot of violence for someone who just wants to serve her time quietly." Riley met the warden's gaze without flinching. "I was asleep when they came in. I tried to stop them from hurting each other, but they were already fighting when I woke up." Morrison studied Riley's face, looking for tells that would indicate deception. She found none, but that only made her more suspicious. People who could lie convincingly under pressure usually had extensive practice doing so. "Detective Raymond called me back last night," Morrison continued. "Interesting conversation. Seems there were some unusual circumstances surrounding your arrest." witnesses who disappeared, evidence that vanished from police, storage. Almost like someone wanted you to end up in my facility for reasons that had nothing to do with embezzlement. Riley's expression never changed, but internally her mind raced. If law enforcement was starting to dig deeper into her background, it would only be a matter of time before they uncovered connections to the underground fighting world. Connections that would reveal why someone with her skills had chosen to get arrested on a minor charge, rather than simply disappearing. The truth was complicated. Riley hadn't stolen money from Meridian Marketing. She'd been hired by competing organizations to infiltrate the company and steal information about their clients' security systems. Corporate espionage that paid better than underground fighting and involved fewer risks of permanent physical damage. But the job had gone wrong when she discovered Meridian was laundering money for criminal organizations that trafficked in things far worse than information. Women and children who disappeared into networks that destroyed lives for profit. Riley had made the mistake of trying to expose the trafficking rather than simply completing her assigned mission. The embezzlement charge was her escape route, a way to disappear into the prison system until the heat died down and the people hunting her moved on to other targets. She'd planned to serve 18 months quietly, then emerge with a clean slate and a new identity. Instead, she'd found herself trapped in a cycle of violence that threatened to expose everything she'd worked to hide. Morrison was still waiting for a response, her eyes sharp with the intelligence that had made her successful in corrections administration. Riley realized the warden suspected more than she was revealing, but suspicion wasn't proof. "I don't know what Detective Raymond told you," Riley said finally, "but I'm here because I made a mistake. I took money that didn't belong to me, and now I'm paying the price. Whatever else you think might be going on, you're wrong." The warden smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Miss Chen, I've been running prisons for 15 years. I can spot a professional when I see one. The question isn't whether you're hiding something. The question is whether what you're hiding makes my facility safer or more dangerous." Before Riley could respond, commotion erupted in the corridor outside her cell. Guards were shouting orders while inmates pressed against their cell doors, trying to see what was happening. Morrison's radio crackled with urgent reports from different parts of the facility. "Warden, we've got problems in C Block. Looks like the Serpent Sisters are making a move on Iron Sisters territory. Multiple fights breaking out. We need backup." Morrison's expression hardened as she realized her worst fears were being realized. The power vacuum created by Riley's actions was causing the prison's delicate ecosystem to collapse. Other gangs were moving to claim territory and resources that had been controlled by the Iron Sisters for years. "Lock down B Block," Morrison ordered into her radio. "Nobody moves until we get control of the situation." She turned back to Riley with a look that mixed frustration with grudging respect. "Congratulations, Miss Chen. You've just started a war. A war." Riley Chen served the rest of her sentence in administrative segregation for her own protection. But the legend of the ghost lived on long after she walked through those steel doors for the last time. The quiet graphic designer who dismantled the most feared gang in Northgate became prison folklore, whispered about in cell blocks across 3 states. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who never wanted to fight at all. Sometimes when you underestimate someone based on how they look, you discover that appearances can be the deadliest deception of all. And sometimes, when bullies think they've found easy prey, they learn too late that some people choose to stay quiet not because they're weak, but because they know exactly how much damage they're capable of causing. The Iron Sisters never recovered their power. Tasha was transferred to maximum security after her injuries healed, her reputation shattered beyond repair. The other gangs that tried to fill the vacuum found themselves facing a different kind of prison, one where inmates had learned that strength didn't always come from size or numbers. As for Riley, she disappeared back into whatever life awaited her on the outside, leaving behind only questions and a reminder that in a world where violence seems to rule, the most terrifying opponents are often the ones who understand it well enough to avoid it until they absolutely can't.